everybody, and welcome to Rewired, Triumph Over Trauma. I am so excited for today's episode. I have the ever so famous Dr. Erik Reis, who has changed the trajectory of my life. He's joining me here 2 weeks from today. I will be in his clinic working along with Dr. Mike. He'll be able to tell you a little bit more about him, and I am so excited because if you haven't followed my journey so far, in the back in like 2019, I was ready to give up on life and commit suicide. Like it was very much a part of on the forefront of my mind, because I had lost hope, and I was given this horrible medical diagnosis, that I had MS and all these other things, and like I just was like, I'm never going to be able to be me again. And so I go out here, and then after getting COVID, and I went and worked with Dr. Reis back in February of 2021. And I came back a different person. I am so excited. Unfortunately, life has happened. And since seeing him, I've been in a car accident, wrecked one of our eco vehicles going 75 miles an hour, hit a big deer. I had COVID again, and have had a bad mold exposure, and also just a whole like 15 months of just being in a very emotionally taxing and draining situation. And so I've started feeling bad again. And I know that, like, for most people who are around me daily, they don't even recognize it. They don't see it. My boyfriend noticed things, and people who know me really, really well, there's like 3 or 4 of them, can pick up subtle things. And so a lot of people, it would be very easy for me to chalk it up to, well, hey, I'm 49, I'm getting forgetful, I'm having balance problems, like I can't stay up as late at night, and all these things that are so easy to just kind of, chalk up to old age and stuff like that. But here's the thing, when I came back in February from seeing Dr. Reis, I felt the best I have ever felt in my life. In March, went to Hocking Hills, and I went hiking, probably the best hiking I've ever done. Felt phenomenal. And then went and did a half marathon in November. And like, I am probably in the best shape of my life, physically, emotionally, and I just have a little bit of cleaning up to do. And I think that that's because I didn't realize how bad I felt. I didn't realize how sick I was until I got to feel well. And I think that that's the value of what Dr. Erik Reis has brought into my life, is that now I understand there's a big difference in feeling good and just complete body wellness. And so, Erik, thank you for joining me. I can't wait to just take you on this journey on my social media so people can see just exactly like how life-changing it is. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Paula. I think I always love hearing your story, but I think that as we talk about kind of what you've gone through and what you've done, and more importantly, what we've done, because this really comes back to you carrying the torch. I've just been very fortunate to be a part of your journey, to be there to be the bumper on the bowling alley guide rails, to make sure that you stay within the lines. But I think one of the things that you touched on that I would like to just start off with saying is that you didn't know how bad you felt until you realized how good you could feel. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people are in that position where they just get so used to being the way that they are, right? Whether it's, in pain, or whether it's having headaches, or whether it's feeling tired, or whether it's not feeling like they can think clearly. And once you kind of break through that and you realize that there's another side of those things, that's when things really start to get fun and entertaining and interesting. Because nobody's stuck the way that they feel. And so that's for better and that's for worse. You might feel good today, and over time you might not feel so good, but then even on the backside of that, you might not feel so good today, but there's always ways to get you to improve. And so I'm sure we'll cover some topics and things like that, but I'm just grateful that we get to hang out. So thanks for having me on.
Good. I go ahead and start with probably the question that I get asked the most is, so what exactly did they do to you out there? And I'm trying to explain these little, the dots on the walls, and like our eyes, my eyes. A lot of what you and I have done is just exercise, because they're, people are like, so did they do like surgery? Did they do anything intensive? I'm like, no, if they're just small little exercises. I would go for an hour, leave for a little while, come back. And so like I've done a lot of posting on my social media, me doing my little eye exercises with the dots.
Sure.
And so people can't seem to understand like the eye component, because really for me, cleaning up whatever it is that does, which I'm
Yeah.
hoping it was, like I was able to walk, I'm not stumbling as much. Like I'm able to see that depth perception, like walking off of the street corner onto the street. Like I was very clumsy and having problems. Driving in a car doesn't make me sick. I don't feel like I'm like white knuckling, and just so many of my vision, like I can tell right now that is probably the biggest thing that I'm off of. And I'm sure that probably has something to do with the vehicle accident. But why are the eyes like, people just don't get that? That's the one
Yeah.
question that people ask me a lot is, so what do you mean? Like, why didn't so an optometrist should be able to catch this for me, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
no.
I'll dispel some myths on that front. So the analogy that I love giving patients is that your brain is kind of like a house, right? And so the first thing that we would decide to do if we built a house is we'd build a really stable foundation, right? So we go and build a foundation, pour concrete, build walls, and make sure everything's steady and level before we build anything on top of that. And it's kind of the same thing for your brain. Your brain starts off building the base, and all of over time things evolve, and layers upon layers start stacking up on top, and that's where we develop and grow. And so our brain really kind of structurally is based kind of like a house. So in your basement, there's a lot of things down there that you need, but you don't necessarily want to look at. And that is heating, plumbing, electricity, right? Water, sewage. I mean, all of these things that we want the house to be able to function with, but we don't want to really have to think about. It's kind of the same thing for your brain and body. So things that you don't have to think about that are in the lower parts of your brain are things like that control your respiration, your digestion, your heart rates, these things that we really shouldn't have to put much bandwidth towards, but they happen in the background. You shouldn't really have to think about how many breaths you take per minute. You shouldn't really have to think about, how to extend your diaphragm during inspiration and expiration, or like how to digest your food. It just happens. And we're fortunate for that. You shouldn't have to be using bandwidth for that. But on top of that, as we start stacking layers, like metaphorically, we build, the first, second, third story. And in that third story, that's where you live cognitively. That's where you live, that's where Paula lives. That's where Erik lives. And so, all of those things underneath that third layer, though, have to support that third layer in order for it to function. So there's a lot of things that go on in the background that we don't have to think about. Some of those systems that we don't really have to think about, but are really important for us, are these three separate systems. And I'll kind of be a little bit general on this because there's more to the story, as with anything. But if you had three friends that went to the same party, you would expect them to tell you relatively the same story about that party, right? And that kind of makes sense. Where was the party at? Who was there? What time did it start and end? Like, I want to know what the food was like, of course. So those three friends go to the same party, they tell you the same story. Everything's good in life, right? Everything lines up. You don't really have a reason to not believe somebody because the stories all line up. Now that makes a lot of sense. But the problem is that if you had those three friends go to that same party and they told you completely different stories, well, then who would you believe? Well, in the real world, for us as humans, we would say, oh, it's always going to be my, best friend Ashley or whatever. Like we're always going to prioritize someone's opinion, but your brain doesn't have that luxury. And so if you have three friends that go to the same party and they tell your brain different stories, your brain now is confused. And it can't just open the window and say, oh, I see who's right and who's wrong. And so it becomes an issue. You have these issues called mismatches that occur. These three friends that go to the same party, specifically when I'm talking about like concussions, different types of traumatic events, anything dealing with some sort of trauma or physical inputs into the brain or body. Friend number one, is your eyes. So your eyes are a huge window into your brain. And I'm not just talking about vision. What I'm talking about is everything from like the retina all the way back to the occipital cortex, which are things like keeping your eyes steady on targets, tracking different things in your visual field, making really fast eye movements, things that you do when you're like reading a book, even like simply like judging depth perception and saying, is one target closer than the other? These are really simple, basic mechanisms that are really important for us as humans because we're very visually dependent. And so To your point, you looking at dots, well, there's no magic at the dots. The problem was that with the injuries that you had a really hard time keeping your eyes on targets. You had a really hard time keeping your eyes on targets with just your head sitting there not doing anything, let alone you walking around, moving in your environment and being active like you are when you're on the squad. So we had to go after that. We also, friend number two, are our muscles and joints. So, all of these muscles and joints that we occupy, we're always fighting gravity. And gravity, therefore, is kind of our friend because it's always activating our brains in some way, shape, or form. Even when you're sleeping, you're always fighting gravity. And this is really important. This is why exercise is so impactful for us, is because movement truly is the language of the brain. It drives neurological development. And that's why we base babies' development off of motor milestones, their tummy time, their crawling, their walking, all of those things. But that's why when astronauts go to space, they can't stay for very long, is because they don't have that gravity giving them constant input. Their brains change, their cognitive processing changes. And so now they try and spend 2 to 4 hours just lifting weights and doing resistance training, but it never really is enough, right? So if friend number one is your vision, and friend number two are your muscles and joints, friend number three is your inner ear system. And that's your balance system. That's when you go on like an elevator or an escalator and you can tell that you're moving, but you don't have to physically be moving your body or have your eyes open to know that. Same thing for you, like translating in a car. If someone's driving, you can close your eyes and sit there and be steady, and you can still feel like you're moving based off of, your inner ear. So the reason we did therapies with you is one, they were really specific to you. Now, I could have 10 other people who have relatively similar injuries as you did, and I would have to put a completely different treatment plan together. Maybe we wouldn't do as much eye movement stuff. Maybe we do more cognitive based stuff, or we do more things like helping your, lower areas of the house, the basement level functions, to optimize like blood flow to your brain, to get you to be able to handle sitting up and laying down in repeated patterns. That's the difference with that. But when those three friends go to the same party and they can't tell you the same story, then there's a mismatch. Brain can't tell who's right or who's wrong. We have to get those back online. And that's why for you, we focus on a lot of visual stuff. And that's why for you, when you come back, we're probably going to have to go through those same systems again to say what's working, what isn't working. And then here's what we want to do is we just want to help you update your software. That's as simple as I can make it, to talk about why your eyes are important, because it's not just me trying to say your optometrist would find this. They'll look for things with the eyeball itself. They're not necessarily looking for the neural components that we're really fixating on. And that's why we did a lot of this stuff with you.
I know that right now, so I was moving and I have steps to go down, and I had to, like, if I'm carrying a box, I had to like lean up against the wall to be able to hold myself so that I could take the steps down, and I had to go very slow. So I know, I was running up and down steps with stuff when I moved in, but now after all those things happened, I'm like, man, what a big difference in, in just how I am. So you talked about digestion. I know a lot of people question me about my diet, and my simple answer is my gut's a wreck. I've got a leaky gut, and my gut's a wreck. And people are like, well, what you eat doesn't impact your brain. And I'm like, oh, if I eat gluten or I eat sugar, like I feel drunk.
Yeah.
And it messes with my vision. And people are like, oh no, that's in your head. So
well, they're not wrong that it's in
that?
your head, but here's what I'll tell you is that so is your nervous system, right? And I have to dispute that myth, because what you do eat does affect your brain. We know that different microbial species in your gut can actually cause different types of psychological conditions. Depression can be manipulated based off of your gut microbiome. There's different companies out there creating probiotics and different types of prebiotics and different types of mechanisms to manipulate those environments. And so your food is a pivotal and foundational aspect of your health. What we know is that inflammation in the gut manifests as inflammation in the brain. And this is the entire model of all the neurodegenerative conditions out there. Parkinson's being preceded by, the neurological symptoms of Parkinson's being preceded by metabolic and dietary and gut issues by like 15 or 20 years. Constipation is one of the hallmark signs, preceding by a decade, if not more, by people who have Parkinson's. So, your digestion is massively, massively influential to your brain health. Now, that doesn't mean that because you're constipated, you have Parkinson's. But what I'm going to tell you is that the foods that you put in your body will be the reason why you feel the way you feel, why you function the way you function. And garbage in equals garbage out, right? So That's a super important component. Foods are complex, but at the end of the day, take a look at the standard American diet, right? It's full of simple sugars, refined carbs. People are eating really bad fats. And so you're set up for metabolic inflammation at every single time you put something in your body or even on your body. So yes, the foods that you eat does matter. And more importantly too, a lot of people who develop gut issues develop brain issues. But a lot of people who develop brain issues also develop gut issues. It's a two-way street. Your vagus nerve is a huge highway that controls everything from like your neck all the way down to like your belly button. And so there's a lot of interesting research coming out about looking at using nutrition to treat the brain, using the brain to change the guts. I mean, it's a two-way street, but it's really a yes and conversation. You have to do all of the above. Because if you don't, you're missing out on one opportunity and one variable that could potentially be really impactful for that individual. So, yes, it's important for you to run labs to look at different metabolic markers, but once again, the individuality aspect is what's important. And you're a great example of that, right? So you may have had a bad gut going into all of the stuff that we've talked about, or maybe you had a bad gut that just was never really addressed until we started looking into it. But you've seen some pretty notable differences in your energy levels, your mood, your sleep, just your function, just based off of us cleaning your diet up and getting you on some good nutrition. Now, some people may look at that and say, well, you should have done that first. Well, that's fine. That's completely tolerable and realistic. But we didn't, right? Because your brain stuff was more primary than your gut stuff. So once we got your brain working better, and now you're like, hey, listen, I still have some of this stuff lingering. Now we just start peeling back the layers. And so it's really a yes and conversation. At the end of the day, my goal is to always get you to be independent, to take care of yourself, to own your health. I'll always be there for you. But like, I don't want you in my office 3 times a week for the rest of your life. That's not a life worth living. Like, I'm cool, but I'm not that cool. I want you out doing stuff. And I know you do too. And so this is the whole philosophy of us at the Neural Connection is, how do we help you help yourself? How do we give you the experience that we have to set you up for success regarding that? And whether it's nutrition, whether it's, exercises, whether it's, structural work, we want to get you to be educated. And that's been a big thing for you, Paul, is you're always hungry for knowing more. And that's why you've come so far and why you will continue to do so far.
One of the things that I was so fascinated with coming to you was my first initial visit. And so you've talked about like how each person is kind of individualized. I know that like for me, I am so sensitive to sleep. Like we've revisited that multiple times, but me and what I don't want to say weaknesses, but what my sensitivities are. Sleep is probably one of the biggest ones, but that's because like you took time and did this, watching my eye movements, watching, all these, the way I stepped, all these things. And I think that that's probably for me, the difference in what makes me want to come back is like it's just not a cookie cutter treatment. It was like very specific to me and what my needs were. And I have people tell me all the time, because I'm very protective of my sleep now, because I feel like that is probably my key thing. Like if I'm like a 2-year-old, if I don't get enough sleep, like I'm very whiny. People can tell, like, but I'm very protective of that. And I get people that tell me all the time, like, you can sleep when you're dead, or, you can make it up tomorrow. I can't. Like if I don't get enough last night, I'm shot for today, and I can sleep all day today, get a nap in at work or whatever. It takes me 2 or 3 days to recover from one night.
Yeah.
So is that common for a lot of people, or am I just weird? I feel like a lot of brain injury people that I talk to and people that are unpacking for trauma, that seems to be a huge thing.
Yeah, there's a lot of corollaries there. First and foremost, sleep when you're dead, that's, a very old and dated statement, because a lot of people who don't sleep end up dying relatively early in their lives. Sleep is a huge, huge factor for quality of life, not only from a, consolidating memory standpoint, or even like having like cognition and executive function, but just quality of life in general. There is no known mental health diagnosis that's not associated with changes or alterations in sleep, and vice versa. So you take a look at those who don't get enough sleep, or who aren't prioritizing sleep, they're not happy. They don't have good brains. Like anyone who tells you that, maybe you can get away with that when you're young and in your 20s, but not in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. That's a huge factor for quality of life. more importantly too, a majority of individuals who have brain injuries or concussions or have some sort of trauma in their past, and like 60 to 80% of those individuals like have alterations in their sleep. Well, of course they do, right? So not only do you have the emotional factor where, your brain is now wired and circuited to have more stress, more traumatic things that your brain's replaying on that record player, but it affects your sleep. And then when you don't get sleep, those symptoms become amplified. It's this kind of feedback loop that you have to really disrupt and get out of. Because insomnia is one of the most common reported sleep issues, especially after traumatic events. So, if your brain's not allowed the time to recover, recoup, and to be able to kind of take the garbage out, which is what your brain does when you're sleeping, you consolidate memories, you kind of fill up the gas tank. And then more importantly, too, you kind of take out the day's garbage to get rid of like, old proteins and plaques and stuff like that. But it also is really important for us too to go through these restorative phases, because if you don't, you'll never recover. And so not only are those perspectives very outdated, but they actually don't match up with any of the literature coming out. I mean, if anyone's listened to Matt Walker's new book about why we sleep or sleep in general, there's a lot of really relevant information in there, and you should be prioritizing your sleep. Because here's the thing, let's say you don't sleep. Let's say you're going to be the night owl, or you wake up and you pride yourself, you're the corporate executive who only sleeps 5 hours a night, right? Well, how good is the work that you're putting in for the other, 17, 18 hours? It's probably not that good. I know people who sleep 8 or 9 hours a night. They can put in an 8-hour workday in 2 or 3 hours because they're so effective. They're so efficient. They're so on. They don't need a nap during the day. They don't have that afternoon lull, which the average, the average, American deals with. And so, it's all about the integrity and the question of perspective. So, sleep when you're dead, that's fine. But how far is that going to get you? And sleep, you sleep a third of your life away, don't you? Now, there's probably an evolutionary reason why you do that. So getting people to sleep is super important. And especially for recovery too. I mean, when you go to the gym to work out, you're breaking down tissue. This is a very, catabolic event. The true healing and the true growth comes when you're not doing things that are breaking you down. That's when you rest. That's when you sleep. That's when you recover. It's the same thing for your brain, right? You're working on things throughout the day and breaking things down to a point, but you have to have some way to recover. And sleep is one of the most foundational things for that. So, Paula, for you, I would say your sleep is your Achilles heel, right? So if you don't get it, you really are affected. For some people, it might be their nutrition, but sleep, no matter what or where you are in your life, will always be foundational. You can't walk away from that. Plus, the research backs it up and is pretty clear. I wouldn't be surprised over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll start seeing more research coming out, just literally creating different types of protocols and therapies that will literally help people sleep better to improve their quality of life. Mental health, physical health, chronic pain, anything along those lines is fair game with sleep, because we know what it does and how impactful it is for the brain.
Right. So I'm going to go down a slippery slope of question right
Ooh,
now.
I like those.
So I know that for me, when I was racking up all my medical diagnoses, I really struggled with, I want to say, the mental health aspect of it. So like they were saying I had depression, anxiety. There were questions about me being bipolar and schizophrenic, because I wasn't able to organize things very well. And just like this, like I was sleeping all the time and I did feel very like hopeless. But like coming to the clinic and coming out of that, like I haven't had any of those battles. And I'm realizing that as I worked with my brain with you, I am able to kind of prioritize things and things out. Now that I had my accident, as things have gotten kind of life's gotten in the way, I'm getting a little, less clear on some of that stuff, but I'm still nowhere where I was. And so some of the people in my circles have asked me about, can there be people out there that are having a lot of like mental health issues, that maybe it is more like how I feel, that it was more related to the brain stuff, and how would somebody be able to tell the difference?
Yeah. Well, I think once again, it's really a yes and conversation, because you can't have mental health issues without having a brain, right? So go have a conversation with a cadaver that has all the muscles, all the tissues, all the organs, a fully functioning spine, for lack of a better term. And you're not going to get very far because they don't have an intact nervous system. So this all involves the brain. And this whole conversation of mental health having it be like a chemical imbalance, is actually very outdated as well too, because if we can take like transmagnetic neural stimulation and stimulate parts of the brain and have people improve their depression scores, none of that has to deal with an imbalance of serotonin or any chemicals. It has to deal with activating specific networks in the brain. And that's really how your brain works, is it works in different networks. These networks need to be high level and they need to be online and doing their job at all times. It's kind of like a functioning town, right? We need to have people who deliver the mail, who help fix things. We need to have, different people, supporting us with police and law, but then also too, we need to have somebody who like makes food for us. And, we need to have the different duties. And that's what these kind of different circuits in our brains do. I think the difficult aspect of this is that mental health is not just saying, oh, psychologically, there's a problem, because ask anybody who's been in pain long enough and they'll tell you that their psychological health's been affected because of it. So it's not just being able to, fit these different diagnoses into, a label or a box, because I think one of the problems with your previous exposure to the medical system is that they were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. They were just saying, oh, well, your symptom has this diagnosis. And so, okay, we're going to put you in that. And it's like, well, they weren't addressing you as the individual that you were structurally, neurologically, metabolically, emotionally, listening to say, okay, Paula, you're telling me that this is going on. Well, when does it go on? How often does it go on? When do you feel this way? Are there things that we can try to learn as quick as possible about your brain and your body and your nervous system to get you to improve so I can start learning as quick as possible? That's my whole job as a provider, is to say, what are the quickest things or quickest interventions that I can give you to learn about your brain and body as quickly as possible to get you improving and set you up for success? Because mental health is not just, dealing with your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex. Like, there's so much more to the story. Chronic inflammation can promote mental health issues. I mean, Alzheimer's, which is, a neurodegenerative based model, is literally being labeled the type 3 diabetes because it deals with chronic blood sugar imbalances. Blood sugar is reactive in the blood vessel. It breaks down and it tears down different types of vessel walls. It kills neurons. And so we're talking about a metabolic issue manifesting neurologically. It's the same thing with MS, by the way. We're talking about a immune imbalance that starts off in the gut, secondarily affects the brain, and now we're looking for brain-based outcomes and brain-based therapies. It's like, well, we're missing the entire conversation, right? This is an inflammatory-based immune dysfunction. So, here's the thing: it's not a perfect system, but I think that we have to challenge that status quo, because if everything was working according to plan and everything was working, perfectly, then we wouldn't be in this position, right? If everything was truly doing what it says it's doing, then why are we seeing all of these different mental health rates skyrocketing? Why are we seeing neurodegenerative conditions that we wouldn't have thought about 50, 70, 100 years ago being very relevant and very common today? We have to challenge that notion. And that's the only difference of what we're trying to do and what I'm trying to do with anybody that I talk to, is how can we think differently? And sometimes that's scary because people might question that and be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. But it's because they don't know, right? And it is scary to not understand that. But the hard part that I struggle with is I've just seen way too many patients who haven't found the answers, much like you. 5th, 10th, 20th doctor, I've been there. It's not fun for the patient or for me, because the patients are demoralized. They don't believe in the system anymore. And then more importantly too, when patients come to me, most of the time they don't have the energy, bandwidth, resources, or even the wherewithal to be like, do I actually want to go through with this? And we really have to just invest in the relationship. And that's what I believe that we've done really well with you, is it's not just seeing you for a week or a visit or whatever. You and I have had conversations, many of them on and off the record, of talking about what else can we do to help you? How else can I support you? What else have you tried? What haven't you tried? Who else can I send you to? Who else can you see? And that's what every patient should have, is they should have a team backing them up, just like a quarterback. And so the hard part with that is our system isn't currently set up for that.
So can you explain, because I do a horrible job at it, exactly like what kind of doctor you are? Because I'll say functional neurology and they're like, what's that? Can you explain to people like, what kind of doctor you are, and maybe the training, and then kind of the difference between you and like maybe my neurologist and the people that were kind of giving me the MS diagnosis and stuff like that?
Absolutely. So my doctorate is in chiropractic medicine. I have a neuroscience specialty as well too. A functional neurologist is essentially a doctor who is pursuing clinical neuroscience in a specific manner. So there's no difference in my philosophy or in my perspective of medicine from a traditional like neurologist, an MD neurologist. It's just, well, we have different tools. So I'm not going to do brain surgery on anybody anytime soon. I'm not going to be giving medications to anybody anytime soon, because that's not what I think is the best route, but that doesn't mean that they're not appropriate, right? So if you have a tumor in your brain, you should go see a neurosurgeon. If you need medication to lower your blood pressure because it's very close to causing a stroke, you should be put on medication. My role as a functional neurologist is to say, listen, are there other ways for me to help you update your software structurally, neurologically, metabolically? Can I use different types of physical therapies? Can I use different types of cognitive, neurological based therapies, visual therapies? Things that I know can affect your brain in some way, shape, or form. Yes, that's the only difference between us and a medical neurologist. More importantly, too, I would say that medical neurology is far more popular or far more understood, or people are aware of it compared to functional neurology. But the functional component is always the question people ask me. They're like, well, what does functional mean? Well, it's more so along the lines of saying you're not healthy today and then tomorrow you're like completely degenerate and like you are sick and stage 3 cancer. Your health is kind of always on this functional spectrum, and the decisions you make today affect your brain body, tomorrow. And so there's this whole functional range of how we want to really optimize people's ability to live their life. And that's really the functional component of that is, just because you don't have a tumor in your brain or we don't see something on an MRI or CT doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you neurologically, or it doesn't mean that there's not something we can do to help you out. And this is a really hard part. And this is, kind of a humbling experience for a majority of concussions, brain injuries, even like post-auto whiplash and even trauma. Traditional standards of doing medical imaging, so MRIs and CTs, are actually very poor at finding any sort of dysfunction. Now they're great for finding like tumors and brain bleeds and venous malformations or like Arnold Chiari malformations, things that are really structurally there. But for like a common concussion or even a relatively moderate severe brain injury, they're not going to be able to catch any sort of structural aberrancies. That's why for me, doing an examination and looking at you structurally and neurologically via bedside exam is always going to be the gold standard, because I want to see the function of the brain. I want to see if inputs match outputs. Can you keep your eyes parked on my thumb? Can you track going in and out? Can you do finger to nose? Can you stand up? And can the inputs from gravity and the coordination of your muscles and brain coordinate in a way to keep you standing up so that you're stable? Or are you falling all over the place? And all of a sudden now you can't keep your balance. We can't get that information from an MRI or a CT. And that's why for me, I want to see your functionality. I want to check and make sure that the expected output comes out of that system when I give it the appropriate input. That's the biggest difference from my philosophy. And functional neurology is not just chiropractic. There are medical doctors, there are physiotherapists, there are a lot of different types of medical professionals that are getting involved in functional neurology because they see how impactful it can be with these patients. Now, if you have a tumor, you go see, go see your standard neurologist. That's not in my wheelhouse. But if you're in a majority of the population where they've been through that and they've been told that there's nothing wrong with them, or there's nothing wrong, they don't have a aberrancy on their CT, MRI, or their blood chemistry is normal, then that's where we can come in and say, listen, let's get really specific with this and make sure that this is individualized for you, for your brain, your body, your nervous system, and then figure out a specific plan for you to help you update your software, get you back on track, and then hopefully get you out of my office. That's the biggest difference between, how I would describe what I do clinically and what I would say a standard medical neurologist would do. And here's the thing, I work really well with them because we're talking the same language. It's just we have different tools. And so if I think somebody needs those services, they get sent out. If they don't, then I try and see what I can do for them. But if not, we try and find someone else who can help fill that gap. And that's why this whole integrative approach is really important. And that's why, at the clinic, that's really our whole motive as well too, is who else do you need to see? And let's get you in front of them so we can make sure we're supporting you.
It's funny because the night that I wrecked our chase vehicle, and so obviously I was on duty, so I had to go to the ER. And as a paramedic, we have great relationships with ER doctors. So I had to get a CT scan, because I told them, I'm like, I can feel it. So there wasn't anything on my CT. And when he came in and told me, well, I don't see anything new. I see all your old stuff, but I don't see anything new. And I said, we need to check my eyes. Like, make sure it's in my eyes. And I knew it, but he just looked at me and he goes, I don't do that. And I told him, I said, and he did diagnose me with a concussion, and he said, like, there's no way you could hit something that hard and not have one.
Yeah.
But like, he looked at me like I had two heads, and he said, Paula, like, you need to follow up with your doc, that you've been seeing for that. He's like, I don't even know what you're asking me to look at. And I'm like, do I have nystagmus? And it was just funny because I kept trying to get him to see what you would have seen, because I could feel it.
Yeah.
Because like, I have pieces of that night, like things that I said to other crew members, and they're like, well, do you remember this? There's pieces I'm missing, big chunks of that night.
Yeah.
And that's part of that concussion. And I have kind of slowly I don't want to say fell off, but like just declined a little bit since then.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big piece of it.
It's an important piece too. And a lot of people who treat brain injuries and concussions know to look at the eyes. Like, that's not, people far smarter than me doing that research, came up with that and researched all that stuff. It's just the clinical application of bringing that from the research into the actual practice is something where I feel a lot of people are failing, and they're really being delayed. I mean, on average, I think this was published in like the Journal of Physiotherapy, probably like 5 or 7 years ago, to be honest with you. But they said like the average research article, the average like piece of information coming from research takes on average anywhere from like 13 to 17 years to be translated into like the public domain. Most people that I know don't have 13 to 17 years or even want to wait that long. And so this is the problem, is that, if you're not actively searching for this information, or if you're a provider and you're just waiting for people to tell it to you, you might be behind the times. And so some of the things that we talk about, or even like, the therapies that we've done with you, Paula, like those aren't anything with chiropractic or anything that are traditional types of medical procedures. Those are actually specifically from vestibular therapy in the physical therapy physio space. They're also specifically visual therapy in like the neuro-ophthalmology space. They just haven't translated to a lot of other domains. And for me, I'm kind of therapy agnostic, where I'm like, listen, I don't care where it came from. I'm just going to give it to you if I think it can help your brain. That to me is the only difference that really separates us from anybody else. On top of that too is, to be honest with you, I don't really care where therapy came from. If it can have some sort of positive impact on you, why would I not choose that? So I think that, getting rid of those party lines to say, listen, what are we going to do to help this patient now, is super important. I think on top of that, I'm not going to tell anybody and say like, I'm the best doctor in the world, or like, I'm the only person that could ever fix somebody. I think I bring a very unique thought process and a skill set to the table, but I love having other doctors to work with, because they're going to see things that I don't. And I need somebody to keep me honest. I tell you that all the time, right? I expect you to keep me honest because I'm going to keep you honest. So it's a two-way street. And I think that that's a really important aspect of medicine, is to have that relationship, which I think we've lost, because now patients only have, 8 minutes with their doctor, and, insurance only reimburses for so many minutes, and you have to just kind of get in and get out. And we lose that aspect. And that's why for us, we like to spend, your new patient exam was an hour and a half with me. I got to know who's in front of me before I try and diagnose you, or even figure out how to get you better. Because I can have the best treatment plan in the world, but if you don't trust me or like me, it's probably not going to work very well. So that's just the reality of the brain,
Right. And that's one of the things that like is kind of the purpose in the drive behind why I'm kind of relaunching, and I'm finding my lane, like my very specific lane in my speaking and stuff like that, is to be able to be an advocate for myself, the value of learning about me. And so like, there's been times where I learned certain things very visually. Some of it I do better, like being able to do things. And you've done such a wonderful job of being able to get me to understand and comprehend my body, like doing the barbecue rolls. So being able to know like when it's an eye problem versus like maybe, I'll get at those two cranial nerves that I've had problems with, like doing barbecue rolls. And I've learned, okay, I've got this toolbox that Erik's taught me. And I, for the most part, can kind of learn, I can fix myself and I can know what I need. But that's because you took the time and kind of really educated me about me. And I think that that's what I really want people to understand is a big picture. And you can't sit around with your neighbor and be like, just because it worked for your neighbor, it doesn't work. It might not work for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess like with that, I thank you so much. And that's where I'm like, you have to look at this total body wellness. Yeah. And like, obviously I'm coming out 2 weeks from today to work with Dr. Mike, but And I obviously know what to expect, but I remember first time I came, there was some paperwork to fill out. And so like, if somebody wants to, like, maybe like somebody's listening to this and they're kind of sitting back and being like, oh, I wonder if they could help me.
Yeah.
Kind of like how can they reach out to you guys? B, and like, what's the kind of like, what to expect? Like, let's just say I'm a new person coming into you. 'Cause I really think that people need to understand like that whole process of, you don't just come out there. There's like, you really get a big picture before you even come into the office. And then that first visit is so crucial.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's all good questions. I mean, first and foremost, you can find us anywhere you literally search Google. So like just type in the neural connection or, Dr. Erik Reis or Dr. Mike Hennis. I'm sure you can put show notes and stuff like that here too. But, our intake process is relatively simple. Like it just always starts with a phone call. And all I do, and Mike does during that phone call, is we just literally ask questions like, what's going on? How long have you been dealing with this? Like, what have you tried? What have you not tried? What are you open to trying? Because it has to be a fit. Like we're really just vetting people to see if we think we can help them. And like I said earlier, if I think I can help you, I'll be honest with you and say, yeah, I think I can. But if I don't think I can help you, then I'm not going to waste your time. Like it's not fun for me as a doctor coming in to try and help somebody who can't be helped, or I don't think I can help them. And it's not fun for the patient because I'm wasting your time and I'm propagating the same, unfortunate bias that we have in a lot of medicine, which is that it's just there to, take care of a symptom or whatever. And so, it's just a really honest point for me, but it's almost a commitment too, to be honest with you, about saying, listen, if we're going to do this, this is what we're going to do. And as long as you're committed, I'm committed, because I'll never care about a patient's care more than they will, because I've been there before. I've been to the situation where I care so much about a patient doing things and trying to keep follow up and asking them to do stuff where they're not committed. And I just feel emotionally distraught. But then it's so frustrating for me too if someone's not committed. So it has to be somebody who's like in it to win it and be like, listen, I will do whatever it takes. And I will follow up, and I will follow up with exercises and therapies, because at the end of the day, you have to own your health. That's the only way for you to truly get better, is to, have somebody there to guide you, which I like to think I'm, relatively good at doing, but I can't live with you 24/7 and you don't want me to, right? So you have to be able to say, listen, I want to kickstart this. Having somebody come in for a week for an intensive is the most fun for me, because we get to see where you start, we get to see where you end up. It's just a complete transformation of like getting people through these plateaus, but the hard work really starts right after that, with all of your home therapies, with all the follow-up that we do, the phone calls, the blood work if we have to, like the referrals to other doctors to address other things structurally, neurologically, like, psychologically, emotionally. There are just so many things that we learn during that week. And that's what's fun for us as docs, is to like get a really quick analysis and opportunity to not only make changes as quick as we can, because that's always a focus and a goal, but more importantly too, to learn about you, to see what you really need. And then at that point, it's a commitment, right? So, I don't know how many, monthly, weekly calls you and I have done, Paula, but I lost track after about 10 or 15. It doesn't matter to me, right? Like we're there to try and support you and get you back to that state where you're at. And then over time, hopefully you don't have to talk to me. Like that's a really good problem to have, right? So, for those who are on the fringe and thinking about it, the easiest thing is just do a phone call, right? So get on a phone, let's have a conversation. Let's do a consultation. Let's chat about what you're going through. Let's see if we think we're a match. And if we are, then we talk about what this looks like, what the requirements are going to be, what are resources we need to utilize, all that stuff. But I don't care about any of that until I figure out if I can actually help the person. And so to me, I like to be honest, because I think that makes the most sense. But, I've also been a part of situations where people have come in where I don't really know if they actually could have been helped, yet they were maybe told, that they could have been helped. And all of a sudden the week turned out to be a really difficult one. So I'll never take on a case that I don't think I can actually be positively impactful for. And I know Mike feels the same way. And that's just our whole ethos at the Neural Connection, is just try and say, listen, how can we help you update your software, do what we need to do, get you in, get you out, and then go live your life. Because that is really what life's worth living. So that's just kind of where we sit at with all of that.
In it to win it. I love that. In 2019, in the beginning of 2019, I was told I wouldn't see 50. Last week I turned 49. And not only am I going to hit 50, I'm going to double down and say I'm hitting 100. So I'm putting that on record out here. And I hope that like when I'm 100, I'm able to have my great grandchildren let me listen to this podcast and I can talk about, see, I did it.
I love that. Yeah. Well, we'll do whatever we can to get you there.
Don't tell me I can't do something.
I love it.
Just like the half marathon, for my 50th, I'm going to go back and hopefully to Florida and do the full marathon
Yeah,
instead of the half. And then I'll have to send a picture to my
I love it.
neurologist.
Yeah, I think
But
he'll be very humbled by that.
I just, yeah, because it sucks because when I go to regular doctors, like, I can't even go just be able to get my yearly checkups without having that hang over my head that I have the MS and that like I need a psych consult because I'm unable to accept my prognosis. And I'm like, test me. Like,
Yeah.
look at this. I'm better.
Yeah.
And it is very frustrating. And I can see why people lose faith in the system because I mean, I was ready to just check out because I'm like, I don't want to live like this. And now I'm like, man, I could have missed out on all of this. Like I've had a phenomenal couple of years. I just got a house. I'm, in a great relationship. And like, I would have missed out on all of that if our paths wouldn't have crossed. So I thank you very much for that.
Well, I'm a big believer that things happen for a reason. I also am a big believer too that we're all just continuously writing the next chapter, and whatever chapter you have written in the past doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to dictate your future. And I think that's what's really cool about the brain is that it's always changing. I mean, till the day we die, you have an opportunity to change your brain, which can change your life. And so that to me, is the reason why I get up in the morning is just to try and see how I can help more people realize that. And then more importantly too, hopefully have a positive impact to say, listen, you still have, a lot of road left on those tires, metaphorically speaking. The hard part in life is you only really get one set of tires. You only get one brain, one body, one nervous system. And so you better take care of it, but also too, you better make sure that you're doing everything you can to optimize it. And so regardless of what's happened to you in the past, there's always a brighter future. I've seen some pretty remarkable things happen in the clinic that have really made me question a lot of the standard ethos that we carry in medicine. So Paula, you're just a great example of giving people hope. And making them realize that they're not stuck the way that they feel they are. And so for the most part, most people didn't sign up for whatever they're feeling. Nobody wrote them a book on how to handle it. And as far as I can tell, most people probably didn't have that on their bucket list, but that's okay. That just means that there's an opportunity there for them to have some sort of growth. And I think that this is what you get to do as a speaker and a podcaster is you get to share your story and you get to really empower people to challenge their narratives too. So I love that you're doing this.
So for the listeners, the Neural Connection and Erik and they've have graciously let me come alongside in 2 weeks. 2 weeks when I'm there for my intensive, we're going to do, hopefully I can get Mike to do some interactions with me on, Facebook or some videos, but I really want to bring in, I'm going to be doing some, at least a video a day, hopefully before and after, because I'll tell you, I wake up and I'm feeling really great. And by the end of the day, I mean, you wouldn't think that, a couple of appointments would wear you out so bad, but like, I think the first time I went, I slept for like 12 hours.
Brain boot camp.
Yeah, it is. It's basically a boot camp. So I'm going to bring you along for that. I know that I really want to show you guys, hopefully you'll get to see over this next 2 weeks of me doing some videos. Hopefully you'll get to see the difference afterwards. And just being able to come inside this, I want to bring you inside my life so that you can see how it's changed me, and maybe it will open up the door. I got led to, and this is why I've chosen to do this, and this is why this is going to be my lane. I got led to functional medicine by a Facebook group where I saw a woman named Amy Zellner, and she has a great Facebook group, and she does a lot with brain injury. And I heard about her story, which gave me hope. And so I'm hoping that maybe me doing this will lead somebody else to hope, because I truly believe if I wouldn't have been, believing that something else was wrong and me looking for more answers and finding those answers out there on the internet, I wouldn't be here today. And so I'm hoping that this podcast and sharing my journey online can maybe give that hope to, even if it's just one person, like that one person could be another person like me.
Yeah.
And that's all I want, is maybe to just give one person, a second chance. And so I guess in closing, I kind of want to say, like, is there anything else that you feel that the people need to know, or what to look forward over the next, my week out there, and maybe things that people will see or anything like that? I know I'm going to be working with Mike.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
hope
those
you
are really
warned
good
him about me.
questions. Here's what I'll say is it's going to be a journey, right? And as any good story is, there's going to be ups and downs, right? So we're really focused on finding out what works and what doesn't work, right? So having a concussion or trauma or some sort of experience, this is the kind of the equivalent of like me pouring water on my laptop. Like I can't tell you what's going to work and what isn't going to work. That's why I go into every system and circuit and try and see, do inputs match outputs and see what else we can do. And then do we have to update software? And it's the same thing for you. So, Paula, fortunately for you, you've been there before, you know what to experience. But for those who haven't, it's really all about, spending the first day just trying to get to know what's working, what isn't working. How do we address this? What's going on? Does this make sense? And then we start playing with things. We start giving therapies and tools and using different modalities like anti-inflammatory protocols, laser stimulation, different types of soft tissue modalities if we have to, visual exercises, brain-based therapies like cognitive exercises. There's just an array of stuff that we can bring to the table. But more importantly, too, I'm hungry for change, and I'm hungry to see things improve. And more importantly, it's really about learning. So we're asking questions. We're always taking inventory and trying to figure out, how to help people out. And so, for you, Paula, your journey has kind of just been a bit of a roller coaster in some cases, because we'll do neuro stuff and also we got into metabolic things. And now here we are, taking a step back because you had a massive mold exposure, which is going to throw your brain and body into just absolute havoc. So now we're kind of getting to a point where like we're getting back on the metabolic component, but we're also going to try and make sure we optimize the brain as well too. And so it's just all about give and take and being on that functional spectrum. So there's never one intensive that is cookie cut or the same as anyone else's. So everyone's is a different journey, and that's what makes it fun for everybody. So we're just optimistic that we get to help you out. And when we do, it's going to just be fun to see where you can go and what you can do with it.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
I'm so looking forward to it. I will be putting the neural connection and the doctor's information in the podcast information. And I'll also be doing, as I do my videos and post on Facebook and Instagram over the next 2 weeks, I'll be tagging the docs and the neural connection. So feel free to, comment in there if you're wondering about something. I know that one of the posts that's going to be coming up is this little laser therapy thing that I put in my nose in the mornings. I would love to be able to tell you, the mylight. Just because I don't know if it makes a difference, but I know that there's a lot of research about that type of information. But feel free to ask questions and interact. The docs will be in there, and hopefully, maybe you guys can start to learn more about them. And I really look forward to bringing you along this journey, and just being able to show you like what it looks like, and just to get to, I hope that somebody gets some hope from this, because man, I'll tell you what, I left there a whole different person, and I'm probably more excited this time than I was the last time, just because I know how good I'm going to feel in 2.5 weeks.
Love it. So
I love that. So thank you for your time. And again, just thank you for everything you've done for me. For the people that are listening, I have dozens of phone calls since I've video calls, different type of stuff of him kind of holding me accountable, and when things happen, redirecting me and try this and try that. That's not something that you get out there. And so having that relationship with my doctor is probably that alone is one of the most inspirational things that I've ever had, because I think that medicine is caring. And I think that, that type of thing is that alone, and just having the ability to know that you're behind me and you support me, and that's key. And so thank you for that. And I look forward to this. And but again, you guys can reach us on I'm the Courageous Survivor. You have under Paula D. Walters, and then Dr. Erik Reis at the Neural Connection. Thank you guys for your time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Erik.
Bye, Paula.